Hi, good evening. This is welcome to let's see now, it's the Spring 2021 lecture series. This time you're going to be getting 4 talks, 4 lectures. Hopefully, if we stick to the schedule, this will appear on Sunday night, followed by the following Wednesday night, followed by the following Sunday night, the following Wednesday night, 2 Sundays, 2 Wednesdays, if everything goes on schedule. If it's a day off, don't forget me a cup. It's a long time. I got a lot of papers to mark in school, and we might be a little bit off the schedule, but we're going to get it done in a pretty quick time. The name of the series is Lashon, Yiddish and Jewish history. And where did I get this idea? It wasn't my idea. This series, entire series, is being sponsored by my very good friends Ed and Esther Leventhal. As you can see, in memory of Ed's mom, Shana Bas Moshemat Lashon, and his grandmother, Lipke Bas Yankel Shmuel Lashon, and she was from Amdur, Lithuania. That's the heart of Yiddish land. And so since his grandmother spoke Yiddish, as many of our grandmothers did, and he remembered some of it apparently, and got them, he was interested in the subject of Yiddish and Yiddish literature. When I heard about this, I said, "You sure? Yiddish?" And he said he is. And I want to tell you something. I've learned over the years to trust his judgment over mine, because Ed Leventhal is the fellow that put me into giving history lectures. Many years ago, he told me, you should start doing this sort of thing that I'm doing now. And I said, nobody's going to be interested in it. And he disagreed with me, and I thought he's wrong, but he was right. And therefore, whenever there's a difference of opinion between me and Ed Leventhal, I know I'm going to follow what he said. So in that spirit, and in memory of his parents and grandparents, we will begin. Now, I'm not giving a history of the Yiddish grammar and all the rest of it. There's another David Katz out there. If you can go Google him, he's the expert in that sort of thing, and he knows everything there is to know about Yiddish. I'm just David Katz in Baltimore. I'm not like him. But as always, I'll share what I know. So we have 4 lectures, and it's not a history of Yiddish exactly, it's Yiddish and Jewish history. But it'll be a history of Yiddish. Without any further ado, let's jump right into material, because we have always a lot of ground to cover. This is the first of 4 lectures. Tonight, the first lecture, and it's all in the where, when, and when, if you want to see the exact copy. Tonight's first lecture is called Background, the Jews of Ashkenaz. Now here we go. A language can be many things. Centripetally, it's a glue that holds members together. Obviously, if you can speak the same language, it's possible, it doesn't guarantee, it can hold people together. After all, let's go to the first one. Let's go to the next one. That's the story of the Tower Bubble, Migdal Bubble, in the Bible, right? As long as they were speaking the same language, they could pull up that construction project. But as we all know, as soon as God changed the languages, and one guy said this and the other guy didn't know what he's talking about, the whole project fell through. So it's a glue that holds people together, and in the absence of it, you don't have that glue. In other words, a specific language is inclusive. At the same time, it keeps others out. I know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying, but the third person doesn't know what you're saying. Isn't that the story, as we see in the next slide, the famous story of Joseph and the brothers? What's the shot that they were talking, and he was listening in? V'hein lo yadu ki shomei Yosef. They were talking freely, as we all know the story, in front of the viceroy of Egypt. After all, he's not Jewish. He doesn't understand what we're saying. They did not know it was their brother. Ki hamelitz me'osam. Because Joseph had put an interpreter there, and so they figured, as long as the interpreter doesn't hear, we don't care if Joseph hears, and of course he heard every word that they're saying. But the key point of the story is, they felt perfectly comfortable sharing private conversations with each other in front of this person who they thought was not Jewish, because they were absolutely certain there's no way you could understand Hebrew. Remember those wind talkers, the American Army sent the Navajos and those other types, and the Germans couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. You can say whatever you want. Now, according to Chazal, this principle of having a specific language is what saved the Jewish people in Egypt. At least it's one of the main factors. It's a Loshinos Lashonon. You remember that? They used it when they were in Egypt. Continue to speak Hebrew or something like that, and not Egyptian. This accounts for how they survived as a people, as a national group, as an ethnic group, which is an all-important point in rabbinic thought. The survival of the Jews as a group, Klal Yisrael, even though theologically we all know, according to rabbinic teaching, that they were in what they call the Memta Sharituma, that they were far gone culturally, theologically, religiously. They believed in Egyptian gods. Oh my goodness, they had all these problems. In spite of that, Lashon is Lashon. At least they continued to speak the same language. Therefore, it was a group. When Moshe approached them, he was speaking to a specific group characterized by language. Now, we don't have good information about the first, what we call the biblical era, when the Jewish people came to Israel and they were there for 900 years. Shoftim, Shmuel, Malachim. But they must have spoken Hebrew. We just don't know exactly what. And there's no doubt that different tribes, had different dialects and things like that. That's pretty obvious. So not everybody knew Hebrew as they define it nowadays with the dictum. The Abarbanel has a very interesting introduction to the book of Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, and where he accuses Yirmiyahu of not being good in the Vrit. He has poor language, he makes grammar mistakes, things like that. The Malbim went crazy and attacked the Abarbanel. But nevertheless, the Abarbanel was prepared to say this because just because people spoke Hebrew doesn't mean everybody was a Hebrew Shakespeare. Isaiah, according to the Abarbanel, was, Jeremiah not. By the time you get to the Second Temple, by Sheni, the linguistic situation became more complicated because the Jews now, for the most part, were located, as the next slide shows, in a diaspora, dispersion, where other strong languages were spoken and predominated. Here's a map after Alexander the Great conquered the world at that time. All those places are Hellenistic. They're ruled by Greeks. The Greek culture was there, and the Greek language was very strong. The Jews also stopped speaking Hebrew for a lot and picked up the Greek. I always like to point out who was the chief rabbinical figure at this time. Antigonus Socha. Antigonus? Not a Jewish name, it's a Greek name. So all of a sudden the Jews found themselves, for the first time since they were in Egypt, in not only a foreign area, but an area dominated by a different strong language and culture. The surviving Hebrew texts, whether rabbinic or not, from the Hellenistic era, are in Greek. That's the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. The Book of Maccabees, which celebrates the triumph of the Jews over the Greeks, is written in Greek. Now maybe the first Book of Maccabees might have been written originally in Hebrew, but the second Book of Maccabees for sure isn't. And so here you have the story of Hanan and the 7 sons, that's where we get it from, in Greek. Then the Romans took over, right? Let's go to the next slide. And the Roman Empire, since most of the Jews lived in the Eastern Mediterranean, it continued to be Greek. The Roman Empire spoke mainly Latin in the western parts, Greek in the eastern parts. And so the Jews were exposed for a long time to a Greek-speaking world, very heavily. That is why, my friends, the Torah and other things were translated in Greek in those days. Now, this obviously caused troubles from the Hebrew language point of view. Let's go to the next one. The book of Nehemiah, written at the very beginning of the Second Temple period, he decries the fact that Jews are now marrying people who are not Jewish. Let's say they converted them. But intermarriage with non-Hebrew speakers leads to the decline of Hebrew as a spoken language. This is what Nehemiah says. Gam bayamim mohem, ra'ises Yehudim, heshivu noshim ashdodios, ammonios movos. He came back to Jerusalem and he found the Jews were all married, set up wives, from Ashdod, that's the Gaza Strip, Ammon, Moab, besides the halachic questions. Uvenehem, and the problem was that when they had kids, so, the father's Jewish, and born Jewish and Hebrew speaker. The mother's not Jewish, or maybe she converted, not a Hebrew speaker. You hear what I just said? Suppose a highly sincere person says they want to convert to Judaism, they don't know Hebrew. And so what was the result? Ubeneim chasim medaber ashdodis. So their kids spoke half and half. They couldn't finish a sentence in a single language. They spoke Ashdod language. Ve'enam akirin ledaber Yehudis. And they couldn't speak Hebrew well. L'chosham am ba'am. That's what happened with all the people. If the mother was Egyptian, the kids spoke half Egyptian, half Hebrew. If he was Syrian, spoke half Syrian, you know what I'm saying? So it made a linguistic mess. Okay? The Rambam in the next slide, very famously, I don't know where he gets it from, but the Rambam describes a prayer crisis as leading to the Shemona Esrei being formed. He says, Kivin Shagol Yisrael b'Nebuchadnezzar Nebuchadnezzar Rasha. The Rambam Hilchos Tefillah at the very beginning, first chapter, says that when the Jews went into exile and they were no longer in their own country speaking Hebrew, and the time in the Nebuchadnezzar, Nisarva Paras V'Yavn Sharumus. They found themselves living and intermarrying in countries like Persia, Greece, and other places. But Nodlem Bonim Barsa Goyim. And their kids grew up in these non-Jewish countries. But Tama Bonim Nizvabel Swasim, and even if their parents were Jewish, the kids couldn't speak Hebrew anymore. Just like I bet most of you listening to this right now can't speak Hebrew well, unless you were in Israel and picked it up. And therefore you had a jargon. Everybody spoke with a mixture of languages. Like I said before, you couldn't finish the sentence. When I was growing up in Bolton, we had a lot of these East European people that couldn't finish the sentence all. Get Krigna Epis from the car. You know? Get Kaifen beim store. Half the words are Yiddish, half the words are English. And the result was the person became inarticulate. He wasn't able to speak well without making mistakes. And he felt funny about it. As Ferdinand III told us very famously, the Swiss linguist, mankind is imprisoned in the prison house of language. And he quotes that pasuk in Nehemiah. The Rambam goes on to say, it was a account of this linguistic crisis. When people tried to pray, they couldn't speak Hebrew well. They couldn't make requests, they couldn't praise God in Hebrew. Actually, they started mixing together with a whole bunch of words, and they felt depressed by it. When Ezra saw that people in Shul can't do Hebrew, therefore now coming to Shul, they invented Shemon Esrei as a sort of dumbbell template. A dumbbell template. So it's short, sweet, poetic, as he says. You have Lashon Tzach, and anybody can learn those words. So this shows you the effect of language. Now this language problem of Jews speaking part of little this, little that, dialects, jargons, instead of pure Hebrew, characterized the Jewish reality in the Second Temple period and after the Second Temple period. So it wasn't Yiddish, but it was Aramaic and different forms and stuff like that. We know this because, as you see in the next slide, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi famously says, I'm an Ivrit not, right? I'm Rabbi, Beretz Yisrael, Lashon Sursi Lama. If you live in Israel, why are you speaking Aramaic, Syriac, Sursi? El-I Lashon Kodesh Lashon Yivanit. As we would say today, speak a proper English or speak a proper Hebrew. Don't mix it together. Don't give me a jargon, a patois. See, he was a purist, you see. He said, get it right. And many of you who listen will perhaps remember the famous Gemaras where they said that when the rabbis themselves didn't know the meanings of certain passages in the books of the prophets, which are in old and very rich Hebrew, they would go to the maidservant, the maid of Rabbi Nasi, because he trained his household, including his staff, to speak proper Hebrew. Same thing happened when the Jews were in Babylonia, as we see in the next one. Rabbi Yosef was the big Amor in Babylonia. Rabbi Yosef Bavel, Lashon Arami Loa. Why the Jews speaking Aramaic in the Babylonia? El Lashon Kodesh, Lashon Parsi. The Persians are in charge. Persian is a great language, a beautiful language. So again, speak proper English or speak proper Hebrew. Don't do this other stuff. So these are purist critiques, in which you say, if your language is Hebrew, learn and master it, and then you'll be able to be articulate, express yourself in Hebrew. Don't take the cheap way out and say, I want to understand Hebrew, so let me just put together a bunch of phrases, and we will, right, we'll talk with each other that way. Now these protests, of course, were unsuccessful. The Gemara, my friends, need I remind you, is not written in Hebrew. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote the Mishnah, at least the form we have. So the Mishnah is in Hebrew. You see? The purist was the guy who wrote the Mishnah, but not in the Gemara. Right? On the other hand, this Gemara, which is not written in Hebrew, as we all know, emerged as the supreme canonical text in Judaism, above the Bible. The Gemara, written in Aramaic, would soon become this all-important text. Agreed? Right around the time, ironically, as we see in the next slide, the Aramaic was going out of business. They picked the wrong horse. The Gemara is concluded, let's see, in the 500s, really even to the 600s. Right around the early 600s, the Muslims, the Arabs burst out of Arabia, conquered the world as you see in front of you, the Caliphate of old, the Umayyads and the Abbasids. And what did they do? The Arabic language became the language of everybody. The Aramaic language was lost. If the Gemara would have been in Arabic, then it would still be around today as a spoken kind of business. Aramaic became an unspoken language, except for a few early on in Jewish history, right at the beginning of the Middle Ages. Now, the fact that Jews will be committed to reading and mastering an opaque text, I'm talking about the Gemara now, in an out-of-date language which is not Hebrew, will be a major factor in the development of Jewish culture. The language of scholarship will not be the spoken language of the day, a real living language like Arabic or Greek, or the way English is nowadays. It also meant that Hebrew would not be the spoken language among the Jews. Even more important, it meant that Hebrew texts, the Bible, the Mishnah, the rabbinic commentary, would always be translated into other languages, even among the most hardcore, culturally insular communities of Jews. The Satmar of Satmars do it in Yiddish. Agreed? The only Satmar is culturally insular as you can get. Yeah, but they don't do it in Lashon Kodesh. They translate Lashon Kodesh to Yiddish. It's Yiddish is another language, it's not Hebrew. This is a remarkable feature of Jewish history. Our Hebrew texts, transmitted to us by God Himself in the Hebrew language, according to the tenets of Jewish fundamentalism, will be absorbed by us in a mediated fashion with another language as the mediator. And that other language will have its own canons, ways of speaking, based on its own unique non-Jewish history. So if I was translating for art scroll, I'd say, well, can I find a Shakespearean phrase? Yeah, but Shakespeare is not real Hebrew, not from the Hebraic spirit. The best example I can think of this, as we see in the next one, is the word God, which we always use. God does not do justice to the sublime Hebrew term of the divine. Just read 2 pages in the Rambam. God's our created everything, is beyond. You can't even say God exists, He created existence, He created everything else. You can't imagine the non-existence of God. The word God is a German word from these little tribal deities. You understand? Woden and Zeus and all that. Thor and all those other junk. Getchkas as they come in Yiddish. These are, pixies and schmixies. It's not the master of the universe, the creator of everything, even the creator of ideas, and so forth. But we use the word God, don't we? We all use it. I've met very, very religious Jews, really from these, who won't use the word God. And I respect that. They're a little bit purist, but they're coming from the point of view that it's a Germanic term that deals with a petty avodah zarah. It doesn't do justice to the Hebrew word. But forever, we've been using the word God. God von Avram, as the famous Hasidic rabbi puts in that prayer. Right? So, that's how it goes. In other words, in our times, we live in funny times. In the modern era, religious Jews have surrendered to the mediation of foreign words. We do everything with art. There's Art Scroll Gemara, that bestseller. So you're saying, I'm going to understand the Gemara in the English language. If you were German 100 years ago, you'd read the Bible with Samson Raphael Hirsch, who has a high German, right? Not a Yiddish, a high German. And what you're saying is, listen, I feel comfortable with the native language, like Rita Nazi said, I want Greek or Persian or something like that, in this case English or German, and I'll access the Chumash and everything else in a foreign language, which is kind of strange. Our ancestors did not like what they would regard as a cultural betrayal. You surrender and use a foreign language as a cultural mediator, especially between you and God. On the other hand, objective reality meant that there would not be Hebrew literacy. Certainly not at the level of spoken language, we all know this, not until the rise of modern state of Israel. So what to do in the face of the organic existential tension I am describing? The answer was Jewish dialects arose. Jewish dialects. The local lingo with a Jewish twist. You can do it in all kinds of ways, right? Different tactics. You can throw in Hebrew words in a foreign language, like I say, you gonna few, right? Or I can do Aramaic words, adarabah, right? Or you can use foreign words in a different way than the locals do, etc., etc. There's all kinds of tricks and shticks. See, I just use tricks and shticks. Now, the result is that in Jewish history, an entire set of Jewish patois evolved, knockoffs of the local lingo. with a specific Jewish twist. There was Judeo-Arabic, Judeo-Greek, Judeo-Persian, Judeo-Italian, and many more. Here, for example, the little community of Livorno. 3,000 Jews, Portuguese Jews, 4,000. Their own language. Bagito is a dialect of the Jews of Livorno, who are Maranas, Portuguese Jews. It's a child of Spanish, Hebrew, Tuscan, Italian. A community of 3,000 people total. This is what they use. Well, once in a long time, they were something. When they something, they had their own Yiddish, as it were, Italian. The most impressive, let's put it this way. These dialects were episodic. They came and went. After all, where's Bagito today? You never even heard it until I told you. The most impressive of these dialects was Judeo-Arabic, simply because it was the language of high rabbinical scholarship for centuries. When the Jews lived, like the Rambam, for example, in the great Arab Empire, the Arab language dominated, so they composed their works like art scroll. They composed their works of pure Judaism in Arabic, or Judeo-Arabic to be more example, which is Arabic with Hebrew letters, something along the lines of Yiddish, right? In Arabic still. So some of the most famous books that we have in Judaism, Maimonides' Murder Book, God for the Perplexed, Bachim Bekudas Chovos Elvos, The Duties of the Heart, the Kuzri by Yehuda Levi, Emunus B'Deus from Sadigon, the books of Beliefs and Opinion, the Pirush HaMishnah Rambam is all in Arabic, the Sefer HaShorashim. That's the book that teaches the Hebrew grammar. The most important Hebrew grammar books, published by the grammarians in Spain, 1900s. These are trying to teach Jews Ivrit, were in Arabic. And Hamasbi Glov Hashem, Abraham Maimonides. So because they wrote these high literary works, people still study Judeo-Arabic today in order to understand the text in the original. But by the time of the Ramban in the 1200s, as we see in the next slide, Jewish texts are already switching to Hebrew. Nobody's writing in Judeo-Arabic anymore in Spain. Right? So we see on the left is the Ralbag, with his famous philosophy book of Jewish philosophy, Milchemas Hashem, which deals with Aristotelianism. It's in Ifrit. And Chazir Kreskas, who's his opponent, or Hashem, heavy-duty Hebraic philosophy, it's in Ifrit. No more Judeo-Arabic. So, Judeo-Arabic, as an important factor, was episodic. Certainly is an important cultural factor. It had its day. When the Frum Sephardim were expelled from Spain in 1492, and they're the only ones who did, because the others stayed behind and converted. And they created a new Sephardi diaspora of their own in the Ottoman Empire, in North Africa, and places like that. Their dialect was not Judeo-Arabic, right? It was Ladino, because they lost the Arabic already by 1492. Now, Ladino had a strong run for a couple of centuries in the Ottoman Empire primarily, as part of the Sephardic cultural imperialism. When the Jews left Spain and kicked out of Spain, ended up like in the Balkans and in the Middle East, they took over the local lingo. And they said, we're in charge now. It's a long story, but they did it, and everybody was speaking Ladino. But then they didn't. That's another story. Okay, here we go. In contrast to everything I said tonight, in contrast to all this is Yiddish, which developed much more widely for longer periods over vaster areas with greater linguistic and cultural potency, with a far vaster literature, and with a unique connection to Torah and Judaism, as the common term Yiddishkeit that we use even today in America indicates. Indeed, Yiddish became a constituent part of the development of a certain type of intense Judaism over the course of 1,000 years, in a way not true of any other dialect. And that's because Yiddish became an integral element of Ashkenazi Judaism culture, and Ashkenaz became the largest and most intensely Jewish part of Klal Yisrael in the last millennium. Indeed, Yiddish was the official language of Ashkenazi Jewry, and if you moved from Alsace-Lorraine in the west, in France, to Minsk in the east, all Yiddish land for many centuries. Wherever you went, you ran across Jews, they all spoke Yiddish. So, Ashkenazi Jewry was beyond borders. They lived in a lot of places, and their language, in the heyday, was all the same. They had dialects, but it's all the same. Okay? So that's why you can see this whole map, from the left, all the way to the end of the right, from France on the left to Belarus and Ukraine on the right, Yiddish land. From Germany over here, all the way down to Hungary, southern Hungary, Yiddish land. That's a big area. No other dialect had like that. Okay? Since Yiddish and Ashkenazi Jewry go together, if we want to look for the origins of Yiddish, we have to look for the origins of Ashkenaz, which are unclear. Now, I can only give you, as I always say, this is my best take on it. At the beginning of the Middle Ages, say the 500s, there was no Jews at all in what we today call France and Germany. The Frankish rulers of the Frankish Empire, the Merovingian Empire of the Franks, they didn't want Jews. They killed them or they converted them. Fine, let it be. On the other hand, next door, do you see in the south of France is Italy, kingdom of the Lombards? Right? There were indeed important Jewish communities in nearby Italy, thanks to the toleration, as we see in the next slide, of the Ostrogoths and the Lombards. So notice the Merovingian Franks were barbarians who killed the Jews, and the Lombards and the Ostrogoths were barbarians who favored the Jews, because the Jews were good for the economy. And so what was the result? There were Jews in Italy, but not in the areas north of Italy, beyond Italy. Then three things happened. Number one, the Carolingians replaced the Merovingians, right? Dynasty B, starting with Charles Martel, remember him? The guy who beat the Muslims back and saved Europe from being conquered by the Muslims in the Battle of Tours. Charles the Hammer. So he became the first Carolingian ruler of this great Frankish empire you see on the map there. And he expanded it. So, let's put it this way. The Carolingians were more pragmatic types of rulers. Number two, the Carolingians, as you can see on the map over here, conquered the northern half of Italy. They annexed it. The conqueror, who was Charlemagne, he saw with his own eyes how the Jews of Italy were contributing to the economy. This influenced him to reverse the Frankish policy and to bring Jews into areas north of Italy, including France and Germany. So this area, the red, it's called the Frankish Empire, became the Holy Roman Empire when the Pope made him Holy Roman Emperor. And he basically said, no, I'm opening the whole place up to Jewish settlement if you want to come, because I view you guys as the bees that will produce the economic honey. And finally, the Jews who settled in this empire were given good treatment. Not because Charlemagne was a tzaddik, but because, listen closely, it's not that the Jews contributed to international trade. The Jews were international trade in those centuries. The Radioites know this. There was no such thing as a Frankish mercantile class, with connections around the world to the different markets. The Jews was the name of the game, baby. Okay? And this continued under Charlemagne and under his successor Louis the Pious. Ad kedei kach, that the Jews started to have it so good because they were successful in business. The government didn't bother them, the government protected them. Louis the Pious actually had a member of, this is funny, it's in the 800s, the 9th century. A member of his cabinet, he had what we would call today Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Treasury, and so forth. He had a Secretary of Jewish Affairs, right? Magister Judiorum, whose job was to protect the Jews. The famous Bishop Agobard of Lyon complains about this, that the Jews are supposed to be our dogs. Why are they living better than us? So it goes to show you what's going on in the Frankish Empire. Now the Jews settled where the trade is. If you look at the map in front of you closely, you'll see the rivers. The roads stink in those days. The rivers are the avenues of trade. So if you're Jewish, you're going to, for business purposes, want to settle and establish a Jewish community where there's water, either on the seacoast or on the rivers. Okay? Makes sense. Because you can transport the goods. Now, the result is that different Jewish groups moved to the Frankish Empire. Italian Jews, Israeli Jews. You know what? Let's go to the next slide. All the way to the right-hand side. From Israel, from Bavel. People don't know this. Moved to the Frankish Empire. North African Jews. Basically, everybody heard there's an open area where you can do business, and they went there. They moved in small and steady numbers into the Frankish Empire. They did business together as Jewish networking, eventually married each other, and out of this cholent emerged the Jewish communities of the greater Frankish Empire. They were not uniform. They didn't develop a single grand Jewish culture of the Frankish Empire, but rather they developed a cluster of distinct Jewish cultures in different regions. Certain types of Jews in Italy, certain types of Jews in southern France, certain types of Jews that we see in northern France. Okay? Some settled in what we call today southern France and developed a distinct cultural profile. This we call Provence Jews. We're going to be interested here in a second group, small in number, and seemingly all related, who settled in the northern part of the Frankish Empire, in the general area of the Great Rhine River, and other important rivers of that region, because there are a lot of little rivers, not so little, that come out of the Rhine. So let's go to the next slide. Here's the Rhine today, and all along, especially in the southern part, that's where you start to have Jewish communities. For the simple reason, that's where you move the goods, baby. Right? You can already see just from the map. And the little rivers on the side also became important places of Jewish communities. That's how you do trade. Okay? That's all. Now, it was this small subset of Jews who live in the Rhine River area generally, this small set of Jews in the great Frankish Empire who invented Yiddish. The Rhine region in which they settled came to be called Lotharingia, Lorraine. Right? Let's go to the next one. We have the famous Chachmi Luther, the first Talmidei Chacham we hear about over there. See how when Louis died, he split his kingdom three ways. On the left is the kingdom of Charles. He gave Charles the Bold the kingdom of France. In the middle, he gave it to Lothair. That middle area is where the Rhine and all its junk is. And if you notice, that's where a lot of Jewish communities were. And therefore, we call them the Chacham of Lothair. These were German-speaking regions, although they were right next to the French-speaking lands. And they were all subject to the Catholic Church, whose language, of course, is Latin. Middle Ages, the language of culture and books and education is Latin. Not a real spoken language. Nobody speaks Latin. You just learn in school. And you can use it to be a notary or a government bureaucrat or something like that, or a churchman. Nobody talks Latin. The local lingos, therefore, were combos of Germanic dialects and French Romance dialects, with a lot of Latin, dollops of Latin thrown in. That's how people talk. So if you go to the next one, you'll see, if you ask me Rashi, you see on the left-hand side is the Rhine River. To the left of the Rhine is France. Or if you look at the map on the right-hand side, we see where the blue is, that's where the king lives. Do you see immediately to the right of the blue in the north, the Duchy de Champagne, the Duchy of Champagne? That's where Rashi lived. So how far is Rashi from the Rhine River? Well, you can see the Rhine River. That's the river in the extreme right of the map on the right. My point is, Rashi lived not in New York, but, what should I say? Western Maryland. Not too far away from where the action is if we want to get there. And so, Rashi, therefore, spoke German. When Rashi was young, he went to yeshiva here in the Rhine, in Worms and Mainz and places like that. Spent many years there. They talked German. Rashi lived in France, in Champagne, so he spoke French. And he also spoke Yiddish, whatever the lingo that the Jews spoke with each other. It is their Yiddish dialect that we still speak today. Right? This combination of French and German words. Do you bench? From Benedictus, Benedicte. Do you daven? From divine, divine. If you're a real Yeki, do you or? From oratio, the southern Germans. Right? You see, the words we still have today are left over from the beginnings of the Yiddish. And when it was a mishmash, look, German today still has a lot of French words in it, if you know German. Right? That is remarkable. Why was it not episodic? Why didn't it just last for a short time? This has to do with the way Ashkenaz Jews developed. Academic scholars debate this a lot, especially the very specific Germanic dialects that linguistically mingled with the Jewish lingos these settlers brought with them from their place of origin. Bottom line is we don't know exactly how. I'm just going to give you my take on it. That's all I can do. Here we go. The medieval Christian and German cultures were linguistically very powerful. They exerted the kind of power English exerts today in America. That's what people spoke. On the other hand, the cultures were oral. Literature and schooling was in Latin. Latin was a language that was not spoken. In other words, for the non-Jews, Latin was like Hebrew for the Jews. It's the official language, but nobody speaks it. But you know how to use it in religious and important ceremonies. But up against this external linguistic and cultural pressure, these Ashkenaz Jews developed an internal culture stronger than yours or mine in America today. The clash, the daily tension between an intense German internal culture and the powerful external German culture of the surrounding world, in which the Jews were a tiny minority, resulted in Jews picking up many words from the surrounding culture while at the same time retaining many words of the internal Jewish culture. What were these Jewish words? Well, the Ashkenaz Jews not only had an intense internal culture, they had a very rich one. The richness derived from the literary classics of Judaism. I'm talking about the Tanakh and rabbinic literature, the Gemara and the Midrashim. This was the literature of Judaism in the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages. I mean, before Rashi was born, What did they have? Now, for some reason, the Ashkenaz Jews in this region of the northern Frankish Empire developed an unusually strong culture of scholarship, of close engagement with Gemara. Let's put it this way. These communities are the origin of Gemara that I've spoken about many times. Which is still with us today. Doesn't go back to Babylonia. Doesn't go back to ancient Israel. It goes back to Ashkenaz in the 1000s, 900s. It's interesting, right? Now, in Ashkenaz, Gemara became inextricably intertwined with self-image, pride of ancestry, veneration of forebears, feelings of elitism and superiority. They used to say we are the descendants of the refugees from the Korban Beis Hamikdash. That's baloney, but that's what they thought. That was their self-image. And of course, a response to the fact that there was no secular culture in that part of the world during the Dark Ages. In the period I'm talking about, let's say Rashi, for example, no libraries, no bookstores, there are no books, no TV, of course, and internet. There's nothing secular. It's the golden age of the Catholic Church. Everything is Catholic. Literature is all Catholic. Buildings are all Catholic. Music and art are Catholic. The result is they produce a lot of very heavy and impressive Catholic stuff, nothing secular. If you're Jewish, you're not interested in Catholic stuff. It's not like you're a Rambam. They say, well, I'll study math and science. There is no math and science out there. There is no philosophy. No religiously neutral subjects. So there's no secular culture out there to catch your interest, even if you wanted one. If you have any brains whatsoever, you have any intellectuality, the only place you can go is inward, into Judaism, into Jewish sources, and you throw your high IQ into the mastery and the intensive cultivation of Gemara and Tanakh and things like that. This is the origin of what I call Gemara. Okay? And out of all this emerges Yiddish. All this came together to create a community, and we've discussed this in my earlier lectures, or sets of communities, with an intense religious passion. Look how they all committed suicide in the First Crusade, rather than convert. Whole communities. Look at the chumras that they love. So much of the halacha that we follow today are the chumras that were voluntarily picked up by our Ashkenazi ancestors. I'll give you one. Sphira. Doesn't say when the Gemara you can't get a haircut, can't, have a wedding. But the Ashkenazi grandparents long ago, they said, no, time Rabbi Kiva, got to do it. They like the chumras. Look at the piyutim, the unbelievably intense religious passion expressed in the piyutim. Secondly, they had a strong cultivation of Torah scholarship, with a great deal of social credit going to the Talmud Chacham, which is not the case with Jewish communities around the world at all. Third, they had assurances of total superiority in every way, copying the surrounding Gentile world. That's what the Ashkenazi Jews were then, and still are. Right? Sometimes it causes us trouble. In other words, I'm talking about an entire, tiny, flourishing subculture. Such a subculture is going to have a lingo of its own. Although our sources are not all clear, Ashkenaz became a major center of Talmudic scholarship in the early 900s. That's long ago. Around the same time that Gemara took off in Spain, it took off in Ashkenaz. Early 900s. The details of how the remote area of the Rhineland, all the way at the end of the world, of all places, became such a center of Talmudic scholarship is a mystery. Look at the next slide. The Professor of Salvation, the big historian, was wondering about this, and he came up with a whole wild, I won't say crazy, he said, it was more than I do, but a very unusual thesis to try to account for this, right? But it happened, starting with Rabbeinu Gershom in the 900s, Ashkenaz becomes one of the most important Torah centers, and Rabbeinu Gershom didn't come from anywhere, he came from somewhere. He didn't come from nowhere, I mean. More importantly, Ashkenaz scholars tackle the hardest task of Jewish scholarship. Let's look at the next one. What are we talking about? These are the guys that cracked open the Gemara. You couldn't read the Gemara today without them. The Pirush Magensa, which was the first version of Rashi, before Rashi started, and then Rashi himself, and then Tosfos on top of Rashi. This is the core of Torah scholarship. Like I said before, without these guys, you couldn't crack the text. And so they took on the hardest nuts, not in Spain, not in Italy, not in the Middle East, all the way out in Nowheresville in Ashkenaz, in northern Rhine area. Who even knows where those places were? And you had all these big scholars. So I'm trying to say over here that Ashkenaz, geographically at the end of the earth, became the center of gravity of Jewish life, Jewish scholarship. Because we still study this stuff today. Right? Now, was everybody in Ashkenaz a Talmud Chacham? No. But did scholars set the tone for society? Yes. The women's piety also played a great contributed to this tone, as we know from many sources. The women were very front. Right? Even when they had a women's lib movement, which Isidoor Epstein described so interestingly, in a very firm way. The piety of an Ashkenazi women is legendary. Now, where am I going with all this? Well, if a lot of people, relative to the size of the population, were doing Gemara, and other similar texts, then you're talking about a lot of literacy and high literature. This high literacy, as I call it, promotes a classicist lingo, which is usually the property of elites, who throw classic quotes around. If I met another guy who took Latin, if I still remember the Latin I learned in high school, I had 4 years of Latin in TA. If I remember that, he'd throw something out from Virgil, I threw something out of him, from Seneca. That's what you do with shticky, right? Or if we knew Greek. Isn't that what you do in the yeshiva world? See what I'm saying? The tone, well, the classicist one, even though it's put at popular levels, to turn verbal communication into something higher and more aesthetic, which we call in English conversation. You see? Now, that means you had a small group with a high level of classic literacy, which is not so common. So society evolves in which, amongst whom, there are a lot of people who know what does it mean, my kamashmalan. They know what it means, meidach girsa, or ibcha mistaba. They know also what it means to be Rash Karech. This guy's as rich as Karech. Everybody knows what it means. You see? And similar biblical and even Haggadic references. This means that everyday language, even of the Hamonam of the masses, was peppered with many classical references from the Bible and the Talmud, broadly defined. These phrases and references mixed with the German language, somewhat in the way that Yeshivish mixes with English in very friendly circles today. My father also used to say, it was legendary, he said, the fish, by standing in the fish market, the fish wives of Vilna, knew Gemara and more Gemara than the Yeshiva, or something like that. Meaning, the old Yiddish they had, the old Yiddish, was so peppered with these literary references from the Gemara and who knows where, that people are astonished. Right? So where is this going? You're going to end up with a language which is Germanic in its basic structure, and how it uses nouns and verbs and adjectives and the like, but which is heavily spiced with non-German words and expressions. These non-German words will be Hebrew, or Hebraisms, and Aramaic. Since neither Hebrew nor Aramaic was a spoken language, these words would be taken from the Bible and the Talmud, two works of high classical literature. These words were Bible and Talmud. Vivid, poetic, striking, and convey a lot of meaning to the insider, I mean the Jew. Why Dafka German, why not French? Well, the way Ashkenaz developed, the demographic and geographic center in the High Middle Ages was in the Rhine area. France was nearby, but was not the center of gravity. The biggest and most impressive communities were near the Rhine and on the Rhine where German was spoken. Although in the 1100s it's true that the biggest balitoses were in France, nevertheless, the main places, even in their days, were in Germany, nearby. So do not be surprised if Yiddish will develop as a German language, although with a lot of French and Romance words thrown in here and there. I told you before, you mentioned you daven, don't you? After all, modern German has a lot of French words in it also. In addition, historically, France went intensely anti-Semitic in the late 1100s. Now, Germany was not free of anti-Semitism, but there was a big difference. In Germany, the king, or the Holy Roman Emperor, needed the Jews for revenue. So accordingly, no German emperor ever expelled the Jews from Germany. It never happened. So in other words, in Germany, the central government favored, in relative terms, the Jews. Let's go to the next one. Here's your Holy Roman Empire. As a unit, the empire never kicked the Jews out the way the French or the English did, or the Spanish. But as you see on the right, look how many thousands of local little states. It's crazy. Right? Most of those local states kicked out the Jews. So basically, you couldn't kick them out from the USA, but you can kick them out from Virginia or Nebraska or that sort of thing. You know what I'm saying? Or counties. That happened a lot. But as a whole, the Jews moved from one place in Germany to another. Okay? By contrast, the kings after Philip Augustus in the late 1100s hated the Jews and did expel them in a vicious cat and mouse game. So as we go to the next one, France, that's the Capetian monarchy, did expel all the Jews in stages. And it never happened in Germany. Since France will become Judenrein, no Jews at all, it did not develop as a Yiddish area. Germany did. So Yiddish will be German. In fact, the French Jews, when they run, most of them run away, as you see next door to Germany. So it become a German area, and that's why Yiddish will be German. Now, a few points about Germany and the German language, which evolved over many centuries. I'm not giving you a long business on this. This is enough. There are three stages of German. I'm talking about the high official German, not the local crazy dialects. They're called Hochdeutsch. The old one in the early Middle Ages, the Middle High German, Middle Hochdeutsch. In the High Middle Ages, then we call the New High German. This will obviously affect Yiddish. But you and I can see, Yiddish is mainly going to be a product of Middle High German, isn't it? Because that's when the Jews will be there. Okay? Yiddish will develop along similar lines. Now, by the way, it's more complicated. Let's go to the next one. These are all the dialects in Germany. They're not all, there's some. That's very vague. I mean, everybody knows in Germany there's some areas you don't know what the heck they're talking about. I remember the American, don't ask me why I remember this. James W. Gerard, who was Woodrow Wilson's ambassador, wrote his memoirs, and he came in 1913 to Germany, and the Kaiser introduced him to some Saxon prince, and the Saxon prince was talking some kind of dialect. And Gerard, who knew German, said, "What did he say?" And the Kaiser said, "I don't know either." You know? I don't know either. So, if you're Jewish, you live in this area, it matters. So Yiddish will develop along somewhat similar lines. But it's also true that Germany developed, or rather expanded, eastward. Let's go to the next one. Right? The right half of the map represents the expansion of Germany through conquest. Charlemagne started the ball rolling by conquering the Saxons, and without going into details, Germany, what you and I call today Eastern Germany, right? Brandenburg, Saxony, those places, Leipzig, they were conquered from the barbarians. Well, the Germans were barbarians, they were from the non-Catholic barbarians. They conquered and Catholicized them. So Germany physically expanded. Well, guess what? If Germany expands, the Jews moved there too, because that's where business opportunities are. This became the eastern part of the Reich, or Österreich. Today, Österreich is Austria. But in the Middle Ages, they meant the right half of that map, right? Vast territories. Here things will be more Slavic. If Bohemia, which is, you can see on the right-hand side, is part of the Holy Roman Empire, the German Empire, Bohemia is Czech. They speak Czech there. That's a Slavic language. The same thing with other areas over there. So all of a sudden, a lot of Slavic words will start to mix with German, and a lot of Slavic words will then start to be admitted into Yiddish, especially if you live in the eastern part. Now, if you live in the western part, over here, you'll have less Slavic words in your day-to-day Yiddish. So the more Yekish you are, the more Western you are, the less Slavic words. But they're all Yekis. If you live in the eastern part, they have more Slavic words. Okay? Even in terms of Judaism, they will develop different minhagim. Let's go to the next one. You can see Sifsei Yiddish, different dialects. Like I'm saying before, it's the same fundamental Yiddish, but different twists. As you see on the left-hand side, as I said, was the German Yekische type. The middle is the eastern part of Germany, and to the right we haven't gotten to that yet. Okay? Now, that means, I'll put it in terms that'll be simple for you. You say Tachnun tomorrow, or you don't say Tachnun tomorrow. Well, in the old Rhineland area called Minagarinas, let's say they do. But in the other part they don't. Oh, you can have fights over that. No, different minhagim developed. And so, for example, let's go to the next one. Ramah, I have to thank my friend Basal Stefanski for sending me all these things. He sells this stuff, on the high-end market. You have the Ramah on the left-hand side. Ramah is Mr. Ashkenaz. No, he's not. Ramah lived in Poland. See, he represents the minhagim of Österreich. You understand? He was criticized by the guy in the extreme right, Vikuch Maim Chaim, the brother of Maral, who lived in Western Germany, and he said, your Minig Ashkenaz in the Shulchan Aruch you wrote doesn't reflect the super Yekish stuff. And the Ramah said, well, I use the guy in the middle, the Maral. He's Mr. Super Yeki. Yeah, but you didn't follow him enough. So even among German-speaking, Yiddish-speaking German Jews, there's like, as we would say in America, the Easterners and the Westerners. Right? So they will develop another Yiddish of East Germany, as it's called, same Yiddish, but with some changes. In short, the geographical expansion of Germany means the geographical expansion of Yiddish land. Because Jews moved here, and all of a sudden, you increase the territory in which Yiddish is spoken. Now I want to address one final subject tonight, as we consider medieval Yiddish, the original Yiddish, and its role in popular Jewish culture, In modern America, from Jews, I think, have developed two zones of culture with one zone of language. There's a Jewish culture, usually religious, and a non-Jewish culture. I think you would agree with me. There's Jewish culture associated with Judaism, and there's an American culture. But even the Jewish culture is in Yiddish. Right? Let's go. The art scroll is the icon of this. Let's say you're a good fellow and you go to Daf Yomi every day. 5 will get you 10, you're using an art scroll. And things like that. Agree? So even your Jewish stuff is an English key. As for the subject matter, well, if the religious Judaic stuff is done in English, then Kal V'chomer, the non-Jewish stuff, is going to be in English. If you read, get the Atlantic or, look on the internet. Literature, journalism, science, popular culture, it's in English. We're used to this. In fact, America has produced funny combinations in which, how should I put it, in which Yiddish speakers will engage in unusual ways with English in unexpected fashion. Here, look at this Hasidic singer doing the Star Spangled Banner. speaker. It's a baseball game. In English. And doing the Star Spangled Banner. See what I mean? That's the way we are today. Notice American Jews, even the Orthodox, don't have a second language. We have English, and that's it. Right? I mean, American Jews can read Hebrew, but they can't really speak it unless they happen to pick it up in Israel. They don't really understand Hebrew except at the basic ritual level. Here's variation. You know, some understand more in the Siddur, some understand. Just start doing the piyutim, and you see them drop. Now let's contrast what I just said with the old Ashkenaz of 1,000 years ago. There too, the Ashkenaz Jews could read Hebrew. They couldn't really understand it except the scholars, the poets. Right? They couldn't really understand it except at the basic ritual level. They certainly didn't speak Hebrew. So far, the same as us. However, the Ashkenazi Jews had their own language, which they used instead of German. In this respect, they were not like us. We use English, which is the language of the country. They did not use German, which was the language of the country. They had their own language, a language all could understand. Whereas a book written in Hebrew would have a limited scholarly readership, a book written in Yiddish could be read and understood by all men, women, and children. So, today, you go to Shopsies, you go to the bookstore, you buy some book on Judaism. Let's say Shavuos was this the other day. You buy a book on Ruth in English. Could be by Big Rabbi Leonsky. I saw had a book the other day on Ruth. It's in English. It's the most frum stuff you're doing in the language of the country. Once upon a time, they were doing Yiddish, which would not be German, it'd be their own language. You see? If you wanted a religious book, to be not only read but understood, you have to write in Yiddish. Let's go to the next one. Like you see over here, Haggadahs, again. Stefanski sent me, these are rare stuff from the 1600s. You see in front of you a Haggadah with Yiddish. Right? It's Hebrew letters, but if you look closely, it's explaining the Yiddish. You see? What does that mean? Haggadahs for the masses. Who wants to sit with a Haggadah without English? If you don't know it Hebrew, just read the words. Doesn't mean anything. In America, they call it Maxwell House Haggadah. Once upon a time, they would call it Yiddish House Haggadah. You see? Or stories from the Bible, the Talmud, Jewish folklore. But those are all Jewish books, with frum themes of one sort or another. The equivalent of the kind of books in English you buy, as I said, in a bookstore today at Shopsies, to read on a boring Shabbos afternoon. What about books that are not frum? I mean, it's true. Some women in old Ashkenaz were pious and recited Tehillim on long Saturday afternoons. Lived the ghetto. We certainly had those. There certainly were those. My mother's mother was like that. She said just had all day long crying, reading from Echo. All right, you had those. But guess what? You also had a lot of others, especially younger women, who want something entertaining to read on Shabbos or other or long Friday nights. That's just normal. The rabbis didn't like it, but so what? Moreover, there's a history, a cyclical history, of Ashkenazic frumkeit. You and I would argue, are living today in a frum world in America where things are generally moving to the right. Would you agree with that? Yeah. You like it, you don't like it. I'd say in general things are moving Yiddishkeit-wise to the right. But in the Middle Ages, especially after the Black Death in the 14th century, it's greatly weakened Ashkenazic frumkeit, as did many other factors. The masses no longer listen to the rabbis, plus the quality of rabbis declined. That's why they started having smicha, some sort of basic licensing. And so, my point is, boys and girls who want to read, and they do want to read the latest racy novels, I'm talking about from the Middle Ages, it's tamed by contemporary standards. Boys and girls who want to read the latest racy novels and poems, accompanied by certain tunes. It's called the jongleurs, the minute singers. These are the rappers in medieval Germany. They're tuned a certain rap. Some Jews can read German, but all Jews can read Yiddish. And so, near the proliferation in the late Middle Ages of Yiddish translations of German novels and rappers with the Christology defanged. The Imamish had King Arthur stories, love stories, They go Baba Mises about Serbovis and things like this. It's not Baba Mises, it's Baba Mises. Maybe I'll talk about this next time. But whenever it talks about Jesus or Mary, something like that, in the Yiddish translation, they'll change it to something different. So we say slightly censored, but only very slightly. It's still a damsel in distress. She runs off with her boyfriend. They kill a dragon. They get captured by pirates, so on and so forth. In other words, this is what the girls want to read on Shabbos afternoon. It's terrible. They should be reading, Musar book. Maybe so, but this is what they're reading. So Yiddish becomes the Jewish language for taking, I'm going to use this following word, for taking treif material and kosherizing it. Whether the rabbis agree with it or not. Okay? This is a Yiddish culture not associated with Judaism. Or maybe I'm wrong. I raised the following question. Is it Jewish? Does the language it's written in make it Jewish? Or not? That's a thoughtful question. And with that, I bid you good night.